The faint hum of classical music filled the lavishly decorated venue as guests in elegant attire chatted and laughed, sipping champagne. The atmosphere was perfect, a picture-perfect moment leading up to a wedding everyone had been waiting for. It was a day of celebration, love, and new beginnings. But for 17-year-old Amara, it was something entirely different. Standing just outside the grand doors of the hall, her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She wasn't here to celebrate. She was here to stop the wedding. Amara clutched her phone tightly, scrolling through the screenshots one last time. Her hands trembled as she read the messages again, each word carving deeper into her sense of betrayal. The truth she held in her hands was heavy, too heavy for a teenager to carry alone. But she had no choice. Her dad deserved to know, even if it meant ruining his big day. Inside, her father, Marcus, stood at the altar, adjusting his suit jacket nervously. At 42, he had finally found love again after years of heartbreak. His bride-to-be, Vanessa, was radiant in her custom designer gown, her smile lighting up the room as she exchanged pleasantries with the guests. To everyone in attendance, they were the perfect couple, but Amara knew better. Taking a deep breath, Amara pushed open the heavy doors. The sound of her footsteps echoed across the room, drawing every pair of eyes toward her. The chatter died instantly, replaced by a hush so thick you could hear a pin drop. Marcus turned to see his daughter standing at the entrance, her face pale but determined. "Amara," he said, his voice filled with confusion. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry across the room. Her eyes darted to Vanessa, who was now glaring at her, a hint of unease flickering behind her carefully composed smile. "This isn't the time," Marcus began, stepping forward, but Amara held up her hand to stop him. "It's important, Dad," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You need to know the truth about her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's expression shifted, a mix of anger and panic flashing across her face. "What is this about?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Amara didn't answer her. Instead, she looked straight at her father, her eyes filled with tears. "Dad, please, just listen to me." Marcus hesitated, torn between the joyous moment he was supposed to be living and the desperation in his daughter's voice. "Amara, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Amara stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper now. "She's not who you think she is, Dad. And if you marry her, you'll regret it." The tension in the room was unbearable. Guests whispered among themselves, their curiosity piqued. Vanessa's face was flushed now, her composed demeanor slipping as she tried to maintain control. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa said, her voice tight. "She's a child, Marcus. Don't let her ruin this day for us." But Marcus wasn't listening to Vanessa anymore. His attention was fully on Amara, who reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She held it up, her hands trembling as she showed him the evidence she had gathered. Marcus took the phone, his face darkening as he read the messages and photos displayed on the screen. His hands clenched, his jaw tightening with each passing second. The joyous atmosphere of the wedding had completely evaporated, replaced by a cloud of uncertainty and dread. Finally, Marcus looked up, his eyes locking with Vanessa's. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low but laced with anger. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say a word, Marcus turned to one of the ushers and said, "Call 911. Now." The room erupted into chaos. Guests shouted in confusion, and Vanessa's face turned ashen as she realized her carefully crafted plan was crumbling before her eyes. But Amara didn't care about the chaos around her. For the first time in weeks, she felt a weight lifting off her chest. She had done the right thing, no matter what happened next. The room buzzed with confusion as wedding guests exchanged bewildered glances, whispering loudly enough for their words to layer over one another. Some pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding drama, while others looked toward Marcus, waiting for an explanation. But Marcus didn't have any answers, not yet. He stood frozen, his eyes darting between Amara and Vanessa, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. Vanessa took a hesitant step forward, her voice trembling as she tried to regain control of the situation. "Marcus, please. Whatever she's showing you, It's not what it looks like. She's upset. She's been upset for months about us getting married. Amara's eyes burned with frustration as she pointed toward Vanessa. That's not true, and you know it. Stop pretending like I'm making this up. Marcus raised his hand, signaling for silence. He turned his gaze to Vanessa, his expression unreadable. I need you to explain this right now, he said, holding up the phone. His voice was calm, but the storm brewing beneath it was impossible to ignore. Vanessa hesitated, her usually confident demeanor faltering under the weight of the moment. I don't know where that came from. It's probably fake, Marcus. Anyone can make things up these days. But Marcus wasn't buying it. He'd seen enough in those few seconds to know that whatever Vanessa was hiding, it wasn't something minor. The messages, the photos, they were damning, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his daughter wouldn't have gone to these lengths if it wasn't important. The air in the room was thick with tension as Marcus motioned for the usher to hold off on calling the authorities. For now. Everyone, I'm sorry, but I need a moment with my daughter and Vanessa. Please give us some privacy. The guests hesitated, reluctant to leave without answers, but Marcus's tone left no room for argument. Slowly, they began filing out of the room, murmuring among themselves as they cast lingering glances back at the bride and groom. When the doors finally closed, Marcus turned his full attention to Amara. Start from the beginning, he said, his voice softer now but no less firm. What is going on, Amara? Amara took a deep breath, her hands still trembling. Dad, I didn't want to do this today, but I didn't have a choice. I tried to tell you before, but you wouldn't listen to me. Vanessa, she's not who she says she is. Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. This is ridiculous. Marcus, she's trying to ruin our day because she can't handle you moving on. You know how teenagers are, they are dramatic. Stop deflecting. Amara shot back, her voice firm despite the tears welling in her eyes. I have proof, Dad. Vanessa's been lying to you this whole time. She's not in love with you. She's using you. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Using me? For what? Amara hesitated, glancing at Vanessa, who looked ready to pounce at any moment. For your money, for your connections, everything. She's been seeing someone else, Dad. The messages on my phone? They're between her and another man. She's been planning to leave you after the wedding. Marcus staggered back slightly, as if the words had physically struck him. He turned to Vanessa, his face pale. Is this true? Vanessa's lips tightened into a thin line. Marcus, she's twisting things. Yes, I've spoken to people, friends, but it's not what she's making it out to be. She's jealous of us, and she's trying to sabotage our relationship. Amara shook her head, pulling up another set of screenshots on her phone. Friends don't send each other these kinds of messages, she said, holding the phone out to Marcus. Look at the dates, the times. She's been lying to you for months. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice rising. Enough. Marcus, are you really going to let a child ruin everything we've built? She's been against me from the start, and now she's resorting to this because she doesn't want to share you. Marcus's mind raced, caught between his daughter's desperate plea and Vanessa's defensive indignation. He wanted to believe Vanessa, but the evidence on Amara's phone painted a different picture. And then there was Amara herself, his little girl, who had always been honest, even when it got her in trouble. She wouldn't make something like this up. Why didn't you come to me sooner? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I tried, Amara said, her eyes glistening. But every time I brought it up, you told me I was imagining things or that I needed to give her a chance. I didn't want to hurt you, Dad, but I couldn't let you marry someone who doesn't really love you. Marcus's heart ached as he looked at his daughter. He thought about all the times she had tried to voice her concerns, only for him to dismiss them. Had he been so blinded by his need for companionship that he had ignored the one person who always had his back? Vanessa, sensing that she was losing ground, tried a different approach. Marcus, please, don't let her manipulate you. She's just scared of losing you. Let's talk about this privately, without her interference. But Marcus shook his head. No, we're going to deal with this now. Together. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Vanessa's face darkened, and for a moment, Amara thought she saw a flash of anger, real, unfiltered anger, in her stepmother-to-be's eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same composed mask Vanessa had worn all day. "Fine," Vanessa said, her voice cold. "If you want to believe her over me, then maybe you don't deserve someone like me. But don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake you've made." With that, she grabbed her bouquet and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed like a gunshot, leaving Marcus and Amara standing in silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus turned to his daughter, his shoulders slumping as the weight of the day finally caught up with him. "I'm sorry, Amara," he said quietly. "I should have listened to you." Amara reached out and hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, Dad. I just didn't want you to get hurt." Marcus nodded, his mind racing with questions. What was Vanessa's real plan, and how deep did her lies go? One thing was certain, this was far from over. Marcus sat down heavily on one of the empty chairs, his face buried in his hands. The grand hall, once buzzing with excitement, now felt eerily quiet and cold. Amara sat beside him, her presence a mix of comfort and guilt. She hadn't wanted to hurt him like this, but the truth had left her no choice. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus's mind replayed every moment he had spent with Vanessa, searching for clues he might have missed. He thought about the times she had dismissed Amara's concerns as teenage rebellion, the sudden lavish expenses she insisted on for the wedding, the late-night phone calls she brushed off as work. Each memory now felt tainted, as if he had been blind to something that had been right in front of him. "I trusted her," Marcus finally said, his voice hollow. I thought she cared about me, about us." Amara reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Dad, it's not your fault. She fooled everyone. But now you know, and you can stop this before it gets worse." Marcus nodded, but his thoughts were far from settled. His trust had been shattered, not just in Vanessa, but in his own judgment. How could he have let someone so deceitful into their lives? Meanwhile, Vanessa was pacing outside the venue, her phone pressed to her ear. Her perfectly composed demeanor was long gone, replaced by barely contained fury. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed into the phone. "Fix this, now." The person on the other end tried to calm her, but Vanessa wasn't listening. Her plans were unraveling, and she needed a way to regain control. She glanced back at the venue doors, her mind racing. If Marcus believed Amara's accusations, everything she had worked for would be ruined. She had come too far to let a teenager destroy her future. Back inside, Marcus was trying to piece together what to do next. "We need to find out how deep this goes," he said, looking at Amara. "If she's been lying about this, who knows what else she's hiding." Amara nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I can help, Dad. I still have all the messages and photos. Maybe we can use them to figure out who she's been talking to." As they scrolled through the evidence together, a name kept appearing in the conversations. C. The messages were vague but suggestive, filled with plans and promises that painted a clear picture of betrayal. "Who's C?" Marcus wondered aloud. "I don't know," Amara admitted. "But whoever it is, they're in on this with her. Look at these dates. They were messaging each other the night before she came back from that business trip." Marcus's jaw tightened. He remembered that trip. Vanessa had been unusually secretive about it, brushing off his questions with vague answers about client meetings. As they dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Vanessa had been leading a double life, carefully balancing her relationship with Marcus while pursuing something, or someone, else on the side. It wasn't just about the money. There was something more, something darker, that neither Marcus nor Amara could fully grasp yet. While Marcus and Amara worked through the evidence, Vanessa was busy making her next move. She knew Marcus wouldn't let this go, not after the scene Amara had caused. Her only option was to get ahead of the situation, to spin the narrative in her favor. She dialed another number, her voice softening into a calculated sweetness. "Hi, it's me," she said, her tone laced with feigned vulnerability. "I need your help. There's been a misunderstanding, and I don't know what to do." On the other end of the line was someone Vanessa had been counting on, an old connection who owed her more than a few favors. As she explained the situation, carefully omitting her guilt, her plan began to take shape. She wasn't going to let Marcus or Amara ruin her. Back at the venue, Marcus felt a mix of anger and determination. He wasn't the type to let betrayal go unanswered, especially when it involved his family. Amara, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. I'm going to confront her. Not here, not now, but soon. I need to hear the truth from her, no matter how much it hurts. Amara nodded, her heart aching for her father. You deserve answers, Dad. Just promise me you'll be careful. She's not who we thought she was, and I don't trust her. I promise, Marcus said, though a part of him wasn't sure what careful even looked like in this situation. As the evening wore on, the tension only grew. Vanessa returned to the venue, her expression carefully controlled. She approached Marcus and Amara, her voice calm but tinged with false sincerity. Marcus, she began, I know you're upset, and I don't blame you. But can we please talk about this privately? I think we can work through it if we just sit down together. Marcus studied her, his eyes searching for any sign of the woman he had thought he loved. But all he saw now was a stranger, someone he couldn't trust. We'll talk, he said, his voice guarded. But not tonight. I need time to process all of this. Vanessa hesitated, then nodded. I understand, she said, though her clenched fists told a different story. Whenever you're ready. As Vanessa left the room, Marcus turned to Amara. We're not done yet, he said. There's more to this, and I'm going to find out what it is. Amara nodded, her resolve matching his. Together, they had uncovered the beginning of Vanessa's deception. But the full truth was still out there, waiting to be revealed. And neither of them was ready to back down. The air between Marcus and Amara felt heavy as they left the venue together. The once celebratory mood of the day had vanished, replaced by an unsettling silence that hung over them like a storm cloud. Neither of them spoke much on the way home, their minds racing in different directions. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, while Amara stared out of the passenger window, her phone clutched in her hands. Amara had sent the screenshots and messages to Marcus's email, just in case Vanessa tried to manipulate the situation further. She wasn't taking any chances. She knew Vanessa wouldn't give up easily, and the last thing Amara wanted was for her father to be blindsided again. When they got home, Marcus sat at the dining table, staring blankly at his phone. He couldn't stop scrolling through the messages and photos Amara had shown him. Each one felt like a dagger, twisting deeper with every passing moment. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that he had been so easily deceived. Amara hesitated in the doorway, unsure of what to say. Dad, she finally whispered, are you okay? Marcus looked up at her, his eyes weary but resolute. I don't know, he admitted. But I'm not going to let this go. She owes us the truth, no matter how ugly it is. As the night dragged on, Marcus decided to dig deeper into Vanessa's past. He called an old friend who worked in private investigations, someone he trusted to be discreet. I need your help, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. I need to know everything about Vanessa, where she's been, who she's been with. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. The investigator agreed, promising to start immediately. Marcus hung up the phone, his resolve hardening. He wasn't going to be another one of Vanessa's victims. Meanwhile, Vanessa was far from idle. She had returned to her apartment, her mind racing with strategies to salvage the situation. Her phone buzzed with a message from C. Asterisk, what's going on? Vanessa's jaw tightened. I saw the wedding drama online. Furiously. Asterisk, it's under control. Just stay quiet and let me handle this. Asterisk. But she wasn't sure it was under control. Marcus had always been level-headed, but she could see the shift in him earlier. He wasn't going to let this go, and Amara was clearly more determined than Vanessa had anticipated. By the next morning, Marcus received a call from his investigator. I found something you need to see, the voice on the other end said. Marcus's heart sank. What is it? There's a man. His name is Calvin. He's been involved with Vanessa for years. They've been running schemes together, targeting wealthy individuals like you. Marcus felt the room spin around him. Schemes? He echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. They've done this before, the investigator continued. She gets close to someone, gains their trust, and then she and Calvin make their move, whether it's draining accounts, securing assets, or disappearing after a big payout. You're not the first, Marcus. And from what I can tell, you weren't supposed to be the last, either. Marcus sat in stunned silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Do you have proof? He finally asked. Yes, the investigator replied. I'll send you everything. An email arrived within minutes, containing a folder of documents, photos, and even a few recorded conversations. As Marcus opened each file, his anger grew. The woman he had planned to marry wasn't just dishonest. She was dangerous. He showed the evidence to Amara, who looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. I knew she was lying, she said, her voice trembling. But I didn't know it was this bad. Marcus nodded grimly. Neither did I. That evening, Vanessa showed up at their door, her face a mask of contrition. She carried a small bag, as if she were expecting to stay the night. Marcus, she began, her voice soft and rehearsed. I know you're angry, but please let me explain. Amara, standing in the hallway, clenched her fists. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice sharp. But Marcus raised a hand, signaling for her to stay back. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Talk, he said, his tone cold and unyielding. Vanessa's eyes darted nervously, as if she were calculating her next move. I made mistakes, she began. I won't deny that, but it's not what you think. Calvin, he's from my past, and I've been trying to cut ties with him. He's the one who keeps dragging me back into this mess. Marcus narrowed his eyes. So you admit you've been lying to me? I had to, Vanessa said quickly. I didn't want you to know about my past because I was afraid you'd judge me. But I love you, Marcus. Everything I've done has been to protect us. Marcus shook his head, his expression one of disbelief. Protect us? You've been scheming with another man behind my back, and you call that protecting us? Vanessa's composure cracked slightly, her voice rising in desperation. Marcus, please, I'm begging you. Don't let Amara turn you against me. We can fix this, together. But Marcus wasn't moved. He took a step closer, his voice low and firm. You're not coming back into this house. I've seen the evidence, Vanessa. I know about the scams, the lies, the plans you and Calvin made. It's over. Vanessa's face paled, and for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. You don't understand what you're doing, she whispered. If you go after Calvin, he won't just sit back and take it. Is that a threat? Marcus asked, his voice cold. It's a warning, Vanessa said, her voice trembling. Marcus didn't respond. He stepped back inside, closing the door firmly behind him. Amara was waiting, her face a mix of relief and concern. What did she say? She admitted to the lies, Marcus said. But it's worse than we thought. There's a lot more to this, and I'm not going to stop until I've exposed everything. As they sat together, piecing through the evidence and deciding what to do next, neither of them noticed the shadowy figure watching the house from across the street. The stakes were higher than they realized, and the danger was closer than they thought. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, but neither Marcus nor Amara felt at ease. Amara had suggested calling the police with the evidence, but Marcus hesitated. He wanted to be thorough, to make sure that whatever steps they took next would hold up if this turned into a legal battle. Let's wait for the investigator to send the rest of the files, Marcus said, his voice low and measured. We'll take everything to the authorities tomorrow. Amara nodded, though her unease was palpable. I just want this to be over, Dad. She's dangerous. What if she tries something? Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I won't let her hurt us, he said firmly. I promise. But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way Vanessa had looked at him earlier, the thinly veiled warning she had given, none of it sat well with him. He glanced at the window, pulling the curtain back slightly to check outside. The street looked empty, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Are you expecting anyone? Amara asked, noticing his tension. Marcus shook his head. No. I don't trust her. Meanwhile, across the street, the shadowy figure lingered, their silhouette blending into the darkness. They were speaking quietly into a phone, their tone clipped and urgent. Yeah, they're inside. No, she didn't go back in. What's the plan? A low voice responded on the other end, the words inaudible but deliberate. The figure nodded, slipping further into the shadows. Back inside, Marcus and Amara decided to call it a night. Amara double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked before heading to her room, while Marcus sat at the dining table, his laptop open as he reviewed the evidence once more. The investigator had sent additional files, and each one painted a darker picture of Vanessa's schemes. There were bank transfers to accounts under fake names, recorded conversations that hinted at plans to manipulate Marcus further, and photos of Vanessa meeting with Calvin in various cities. One document in particular caught Marcus's eye, a lease agreement for an apartment he didn't recognize. It was dated just 2 weeks ago. He immediately called the investigator. "Tell me about this address," he said, reading off the details. "It's one of the places Vanessa's been using to meet Calvin," the investigator explained. "They've been careful to keep their interactions off the radar, but this lease was a slip-up. It's not in her name, it's in his." Marcus's chest tightened. "Do you think they're there now?" "It's possible," the investigator replied. "But I wouldn't recommend going there alone. If you want to confront them, bring the police." Marcus thanked him and hung up, staring at the address on the screen. He considered the advice, but his frustration and anger were boiling over. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Just as he was about to grab his keys, a loud knock echoed through the house, startling him. Amara rushed out of her room, her eyes wide with alarm. "Who is it?" she whispered. Marcus held up a hand, signaling her to stay back. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. To his surprise, it wasn't Vanessa or anyone he recognized. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. "Who's there?" Marcus called out, keeping his voice steady. The man shifted, his face partially obscured by the shadows. "I'm a friend of Vanessa's," he said, his tone calm but unsettling. "She asked me to check on you." Marcus's pulse quickened. "We don't need checking on. You can leave." The man didn't budge. "I think it's best if we talk," he said, his voice taking on an edge. "There's a lot you don't understand about this situation." Amara clutched Marcus's arm, whispering, "Don't open the door." Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'm calling the police," he said loudly, hoping the threat would scare the man off. But the man chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Go ahead," he said. "But you might want to think twice about making this mess even bigger. Vanessa's not the only one with secrets, Marcus." Marcus froze, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he slid an envelope under the door. "When you're ready to talk, give me a call," he said before turning and walking away. Marcus waited until the man was out of sight before picking up the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Marcus standing outside his office building, taken just a few days ago. In the background, Calvin was visible, watching him from across the street. Amara looked over his shoulder, her face pale. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means they've been watching us," Marcus said, his voice grim. The stakes had just been raised. It wasn't just about uncovering Vanessa's lies anymore. It was about protecting their lives. The house felt suffocating after the man's visit. Marcus and Amara sat in tense silence, the photograph lying on the table between them like a bomb waiting to go off. Amara's mind raced with questions, but one look at her father's face told her he was already formulating a plan. "We can't let them scare us," Marcus said finally, his voice steady but tinged with anger. "This ends tonight." Amara hesitated. "What do you mean? What are you going to do?" Marcus stood, grabbing his keys and phone. "I'm going to that address," he said firmly. "I need to face this head-on. If Calvin's there, I'll make sure he understands I'm not backing down." "Dad, that's dangerous," Amara protested, fear evident in her voice. "What if it's a trap?" Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'll be careful, but I can't sit here and wait for them to make the next move." Amara reluctantly nodded, though her worry didn't fade. "At least let me come with you." "No," Marcus said firmly. "You're safer here. Lock the doors and call the police if anything happens." With that, he left, his mind laser-focused on the confrontation ahead. The address wasn't far, And as he drove, his thoughts churned with everything that had happened. Vanessa's lies, Calvin's schemes, the threats, they all pointed to one thing. They thought they could manipulate him. But they were wrong. When Marcus arrived at the apartment building, he parked a block away, not wanting to alert anyone to his presence. The building was old and nondescript, with dim lighting and a flickering sign above the entrance. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and faint cigarette smoke. He found the apartment number the investigator had mentioned and paused outside the door. He could hear voices inside, Vanessa's unmistakable tone, sharp and angry, and a man's voice, deeper and more controlled. Marcus knocked loudly, his adrenaline surging. The voices stopped abruptly, and a moment later, the door opened just enough for Vanessa's face to appear. Her expression shifted from shock to defiance in an instant. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, trying to block his view inside. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "Now." Before Vanessa could respond, the door swung open wider, revealing Calvin standing behind her. He was tall and imposing, his expression unreadable. "Let him in," Calvin said, his voice low and commanding. Vanessa hesitated but stepped aside, allowing Marcus to enter. The apartment was sparsely furnished, with stacks of papers and a few duffel bags scattered around. It was clear they hadn't planned to stay long. Marcus wasted no time. "I know everything," he said, his gaze shifting between the two of them. "The scams, the lies, the plans to take my money. It's over." Calvin smirked, leaning casually against the wall. "Is that so? And what are you planning to do about it?" "I have enough evidence to put you both away," Marcus said evenly. "The police will be very interested in what I've found." Vanessa's composure cracked, her eyes darting nervously to Calvin, but Calvin didn't flinch. Instead, he chuckled, shaking his head. "You think you've won, don't you?" Marcus frowned, his instincts screaming that something was off. "What are you talking about?" Calvin gestured to Vanessa, who reluctantly pulled a small device from her pocket. She pressed a button, and Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see an email notification. Opening it, his blood ran cold. The email contained a series of photos and documents, old business deals, contracts, and financial records. At first glance, they seemed normal, but as Marcus scanned them, he realized they had been doctored to make it look like he was involved in fraudulent activities. Calvin's smirk widened as he watched Marcus's expression change. "You're not the only one who's been digging," he said. "If you go to the police, these will mysteriously appear, and suddenly you'll be the one under investigation." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Calvin said, his tone smug. "Think about it. Even if you prove your innocence, the damage to your reputation will be done. Your business, your name, your family, it'll all be dragged through the mud." Vanessa stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Marcus, please. I never wanted it to come to this, but you've left us no choice." Marcus glared at her, his anger boiling over. "You really think you can get away with this? You're both delusional." Calvin straightened, his demeanor suddenly serious. "We're not delusional, Marcus. We're prepared. And unless you want to lose everything, you'll walk away. Forget about Vanessa, forget about me, and go back to your life." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus's mind raced, weighing his options. He could see the trap they had laid, the intricate web of lies designed to ensnare him. But he also knew he couldn't let them win. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but resolute. "You're right about one thing. I won't let you destroy my life, but you've underestimated me." Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving Vanessa and Calvin to exchange uneasy glances. Outside, Marcus made a call, his voice calm and steady. "It's me. They've escalated things, but I've got a plan. Let's make sure they don't see it coming." As he drove away, the flickering streetlights cast long shadows, and a faint smile played on his lips. He wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot, and this time, he had a twist of his own in store.